Damon, welcome to Success with Soul.
What's up, Kate? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat. I love talking about SEO and AI and all the cool new techie things so we can geek out a little bit. And you have such a cool story, which I mentioned a bit in the intro. Tell me about your experience outranking a billion-dollar company on Google. That is not something most people can say.
Yeah, so the fun story, over the years, I've done it a couple times now, but the first one that always comes to mind was before I had the agency, and it was when I was first getting into SEO. So I was reeled into watching the Bachelor finale with my wife, and we were what I had remembered from previous finales was they'd leave a cliffhanger. And so it was like, hey, come back in a couple weeks when we start the new season, find out who the new Bachelor is. But this time they said, wait until after the commercial, and we'll tell you who the new Bachelor is. And so the early stage entrepreneur in my mind at that point started wondering that was intentional, but why? So I started to look up this guy. His name was Andy Baldwin. And for me, understanding search engines, I could find very little about this guy. So I got thinking, if I'm familiar with navigating search engines, I'm not a diehard fan, and I can't find anything. Imagine all the other people that aren't as familiar with search engines that are diehard fans and their frustration. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to be in here for a couple hours. I'm going to build a website about this guy. So I spent that night, I think I spent just like 2 hours, and I went and found whatever I could about the guy. And it was like little pockets of just a little paragraph here on one site and a sentence on another, really few pictures. And I pieced them all together into an organized format. And within just a couple days, so I added whatever SEO I knew at the time. And within a couple days, I was outranking ABC, a billion-dollar brand, for their Bachelor brand.
Wow.
So, in retrospect, there's a lot of interesting things in that story. So one is I realized I solved the problem. And this applies to just entrepreneurship in general, is I unknowingly solved the problem of people wanting easy to access information. And then, of course, hunky shirtless pictures of this guy. So between the two, it's funny, but you can apply that to whatever's in your industry, right? Is like what the other competitors are doing isn't necessarily directly your competition. Like, you can choose a different path, and ultimately you just got to decide what is it that the consumers really need, and how do you present that in a way that's better than the competition.
Right, right. So the same is possible for anyone then. Anybody, with the right knowledge and skills could do this too.
Yeah, so I mean, we do it consistently now. I mean, we've outranked a couple billion-dollar companies and had a couple billion-dollar clients. So now there's a process. I've had the agency for 16 years now, but before I started the agency, I had repeated similar things with other, maybe not billion-dollar companies, but tens to hundreds of million-dollar companies. And it was the process. The process was the same throughout all of them. Was, how do I deliver this in a way that's easier for people to access? So it was really that simple.
So a lot of our listeners are coaches. Can you have like an example of how they could think about that concept of packaging something up in a way that's easier for people to access?
I mean, for coaches, what comes to mind is the approach that I take as me as a personal brand, right? So one way you look at things is whether you're a one-on-one coach or one-to-many, or you have coaches beneath you that you serve a greater audience. Ultimately, people buy because they trust you. So like with my agency, I have a team of 50, and they pay my company, but they buy because they trust Damon. And
Mm-hmm.
so that largely comes from sharing online and being vulnerable. So I've built out a multi-million-dollar business without spending a dollar on ads. And so our main lead source historically had been just referrals from delivering what you're good at. But in the last couple of years, what's matched or outpaced that is, coming back to your question, is just me as an individual showing up and giving away everything for free. Now, a lot of times people have a hesitation with that, but free has become the single most profitable source of lead generation for us. Because if you think about it, like for coaches, it's highly unlikely that you as a coach have a unique thing in your mind that they can't find on Google or YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily the knowledge that people are buying from you, it's the trust and ability to implement. So when I give away everything for free, from my perspective, there's only three types of content consumers, and it's largely probably the same for coaches. So you have the first content consumer is the person that takes your advice and runs. Well, great. They were never your client anyway, so you didn't lose anything. But what you did gain is now you increased your reputation and credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second type of content consumer is the person that says, okay, maybe I don't need it now. I might later, or I know somebody that does. So great. Now you increase your credibility and you potentially got a lead. The third type of content consumer is the person that goes, this coach knows what they're talking about. Here's my money. And then they
Mm-hmm.
just buy. So with few and far excuses in between, I find no reason not to give everything away for free because the knowledge isn't technically what they're buying. It's the trust and the implementation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes so much sense. And it's why we always say, like, even about our mastermind program is, yeah, there's a portal and it has tons of tutorials and strategies and, how to do the things. But that's like the least valuable part of the program, because what is actually valuable is coming to the coaching calls. And when you get stuck, actually being able to work through things with people and like have somebody reflect the thoughts that you're having and see how that's affecting the way that you're showing up. And it's all of the implementation and accountability and things like that. Like
Mhm.
the actual information you could technically find anywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies out there that say courses, the number one reason for failure is an excessive amount of information. So it's the
Mm,
opposite of what we think, right? We're like, let's
yeah.
just vomit everything, but it's overwhelming. And so you bring up another good point is in addition to the trust and implementation, it's the community and relatability.
Yeah.
So, I've joined, I'm in 3 high level masterminds now that are all 50 grand or higher a piece. And in those masterminds, the first year I bought in because of the curriculum and what I
Mm-hmm.
could potentially implement and then grow my business. In the second years that I've renewed, it's because of the community.
100%. Yeah. And that's same like what we even say about our mastermind is like, you're not going to renew because you didn't get the result per se. You're going to renew because you want to stay a part of that community and you realize how valuable it is to surround yourself with people who are like you, doing the same things, understand. I mean, I think all of us entrepreneurs can relate to most people in our real lives, no matter what niche we're in, are just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what it's like to own your own business and the stress and the,
Mhm.
challenges and personal growth that has to happen during that process. And so, yeah, the community is just the invaluable piece. It's like stay
Yep.
forever for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so you said a couple things in there that I want to go back to. And the first one was that you were able to grow to multiple 7 figures, I think you said, without using ads. And so I think that's interesting that you weren't using ads. Were you using social media or was this all SEO?
So I'm like the anomaly and largely a hypocrite. So for running a marketing agency, I did very little marketing, but it was intentional. So it was not SEO. Um, and that's the intentional part. We get leads from SEO, obviously, but surprisingly, we don't put a lot of effort into that because for me, SEOing for SEO is like I have a real high expectation of the types of clients that I want to engage with. So for me, hopefully listeners get to a point where in their business, they have the freedom and opportunity to say no to people. Like they're not stuck in a position where they have to say yes sometimes. And so I've been fortunate to really value that at an early position where to me it matters. Once you get your base needs met, like after a certain financial accomplishment, it becomes way more about freedom of time and peace of mind. And so for me, there is no amount of money you could pay me to take on the tiniest bit of drama in a client. And in fact, we have, about 2, 3 years ago, we updated our contract and we have an entire full page that says reasons not to hire us. And what that is it's just weeding out all the people that we don't want to deal with. And what's interesting in that, so, off the top of my head, some of the bullet points in there are like, you're hiring an agency, not an employee. So don't tell us what to do. Um, you don't micromanage us. You're paying us for our expertise, so we're going to do those things. You are not paying us to train you and log all those things. So we're going to do them and move on. One of the ones that seems to be like a crowd favorite is titled "New Sheriff Syndrome." So anytime it says something along the lines of businesses evolve, and as you have team leads change, that's fine. But just because you have a new team lead comes in doesn't mean we change direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like all these things that we implemented in there proactively that are either things we don't want to deal with or things that inhibit progress. And if they inhibit progress, it's on our reputation, even though it's not our fault. So I just put all those things in advance. And what's interesting is it serves an obvious purpose, but out of 20 people I send that contract to, um, you know, 5 of them say nothing, 14 of them compliment it. And so it actually builds a level of trust because they're like, oh, damn, Damon knows what he's talking about. So let's move forward because I trust that confidence. And the one person that complains is exactly the person that I don't want to do business with, that it's meant to weed out.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down a rabbit hole. What was the original question? Bring me back.
The original question was, how did you grow to
Oh, build
multiple
it.
millions without ads and now without
Yeah.
SEO?
Yeah. So I mentioned that contract because that's why I don't do SEO for us, because when you optimize for, let's say, the phrase SEO company, there's no ability to pre-qualify that lead. And so because I'm at a fortunate position where peace of mind matters more, I'd rather not spend my team have them spend countless hours of time on leads that aren't qualified. So the opposite of that, where we have gotten leads, is largely only 2 places. One is referrals, because of the results that we drive. Like I've had the agency for 16 years, and we still have a dozen clients from year one, 16 years ago. And so our track record is through the roof, and then that's a complement to the results we drive. And then because of that, the clients share those results, and then it's a compounding effect where 1 tells 2, and 2 tells 4, and 4 tells 16. So I could probably connect the dots on 80 to 90% of our clients, with a string of yarn back from one client to another client to another client. So up until the last 3 years, it's mostly been that. And then 3 years ago, I got to a point where same thing, peace of mind and productivity was at the time I was largely only on Facebook, and I had a hard line between business and personal use. And back then it was completely personal. So I wasn't really vulnerable, didn't share a lot of business stuff. And if a client would add me, I'd just ignore it. And I decided one day I was just going to delete Facebook, not because of drama. I was really good about filtering that out. I just realized it wasn't productive. And so what I did is, we all know that if you delete Facebook, it doesn't really delete it. And so what I did is I said, okay, if I'm going to disable this, I'm going to truly wipe this out. And so my wife was amazing. It took her, I had her log in, and she spent 3 weeks, a couple hours a day, deleting every post I'd ever made, going to every post I'd ever commented on and deleting every comment I had ever made, unfriending every person I was connected with, going through my private messages and deleting every conversation I'd ever had, and just wiped out everything. Then I hit delete. So what happened after that is a couple of weeks went by, and I realized I had, 1 client that started as a friend. So they were in my Facebook, but now I could no longer contact them on the business side of things. And so I said, okay, well, I probably need to turn it back on. But if I do that, how can I do social media my way? And I didn't know what that meant, but I was willing to figure it out. And so what was going through my head was, okay, how do I be productive with this? And that means I had to eliminate the boundary between personal and business. But then the next question is, how do I provide value for the things I like to talk about, which is business and entrepreneurship and SEO, without boring friends and family? And how do I talk about my appreciation for my wife and kids without boring clients? And I got to a point where I said, I don't care. Both of those are me, so I will just post about both of those. And then what began to evolve was, over about 3 months, I started to get more traction than I had previously. Nothing substantial, but I started to notice the difference. And then in about 6 months of being vulnerable and sharing about client results, and then also talking about how proud of my kids I am, then I started to notice substantial increases in engagement. And then at about 9 months, I realized I had some leads come through. And so I went back and quantified it. And at that 9-month mark, it had added 150 grand in reoccurring contracts. And so since then, it's probably added, I don't know, $600,000 or $700,000 a year in reoccurring contracts. And so at that point, I said, okay, well, this is working. I enjoy this. I can give value, while also sharing, and this being an opportunity to voice things. And so I continued down that path, and I've systematized it since then. But ultimately, it's just showing up and doing what we talked about earlier, which is just giving away all the advice for free. So if you go look at my posts, anything that's business related, there's no call to action. It's here's the problem, here's the answer, here's how you do it on your own. And then where they convert is they follow, the coaches, they follow you for the business advice, but they convert on the personal. So an example would be, hey, Damon, I know you do SEO. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that was really cool what you said about your wife. That's the majority of how things convert, is when they finally click and relate as a person.
Yeah, I love that. So true. So the second piece of that, which is a perfect segue here, is kind of talking about building more of a personal brand versus, a company, where I think especially a lot of coaches and consultants, myself included, started out with just my website was just my name, right? katekordsmeyer.com. And then I have gone on from there to build several different brands. But it's been an interesting process of figuring out the balance of still kind of being the face of the brand without being the one who does everything, or that when people join our programs that they expect to only see me and are disappointed if I'm not the one there doing something. How do you manage that?
It's simple. It's just how you set expectations. So if the client is disappointed, it's because you missed an opportunity to set that expectation. So I'm in a similar position, right? I mean, everybody sees me on social media. They
Right.
don't see my team of 50, but the difference is I mention the team. So like a lot of the times, instead of me saying like, hey, we accomplished X, Y, and Z for a client, here's a screenshot, look how cool. It's just like one change. Look what my team accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still me talking about it. It's still my face, but it's very clear representation that there's a greater body behind just Damon. And then when it comes into the time to do a transaction, I set the expectations in multiple points. So I no longer take onboarding calls at all. But when I transition after the deal is closed, we have a kind of templatized intro email where it says, hey, Jane Doe, looking forward to working with you. To set expectations, here's how the next few days will look.
Mm-hmm.
Day number 1 is so-and-so is going to send an intro, and day number 5 and day number whatever. But let me start that now. Please meet Vlad, our COO. And then as I segue out, I say, they're going to take over from here, but I'm always available if you need anything. So I make it very clear on whose responsibilities are what,
Yeah.
and that I no longer have any recurring engagement, but I give them the support that like, hey, if you really need, hit me up. And it never happens.
Right.
And if it were to happen, then you don't get sucked in still. Then you're like, great question. Give them the answer, or transition it back to the person that should take it over from
Right.
there. So even if you do have the answer, you can still not give it, but facilitate the transition so they don't get in the habit of always coming back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good point. And expectations for sure. Everything. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about some AI and how that is playing with SEO right now. So, how do you feel like they currently are working together, and could they help, could the combination of the two help somebody kind of grasp the science of SEO without having to like fully understand all of it themselves?
So the way you phrase that is interesting. I don't think that it would make it easier to understand the concepts. I do think it's an amplifier if you understand the concepts.
Great.
Um, because I mean, because the trick is it could help you better understand it, but you don't know what you don't know. And because
Hmm.
you don't know that, you don't know what to prompt AI to say, help me learn this thing.
Right.
And so if you do understand the core concepts and pillars of the fulfillment of SEO, then you can dig deeper and get more familiar with it. But it's who's going to win with it is really who better understands how to leverage it.
Right.
At least as of now, I don't think it will replace SEO. I think it'll evolve it. It's funny that we're talking about this because a couple of weeks ago, I would have probably deferred it a little bit because we don't use AI in the sense of providing final output
Hmm.
because there's still too many quality control issues. There's still too many liabilities. Um, at the quality level that the standards that I hold our output to, it takes just as much time, if not more, to correct an AI output than it does to write it from the ground up. So from a copywriting perspective, we only use it for ideation. We don't use it for output, but it's like, okay, we came up with these ideas. Are there more that we missed? Then we take that and then do our manual writing. But here's where things have changed. Why I say talking about this now versus a couple weeks ago is an entirely different conversation, is because I have a good friend I went to dinner with just a couple days ago who's always on emerging technologies and is just interested in those things. And he's been in AI for years. And he's the type of guy that just programs things around his house for fun and automates them and teaches his kid how to do it. So I had this conversation with him and I said, I don't think SEO is going away in the next couple of years, but do you think it would change the perceived value, right? Would clients, because of the perception of AI adoption, would it devalue the price points? Would they say, okay, $3,000 is too much, and now I think even though you're doing the same thing, basically, I think it's only worth $1,000 because I couldn't tell you why, but because of AI, right? And he had an interesting reply, and he agreed that AI isn't going to replace SEO, it'll evolve it, because at its core, SEO is not what you're doing with SEO. What you're doing with SEO is you're getting a product or service in front of a buyer. And so AI may evolve that. And he gave a really great analogy. So if you think about music, so over the years, music, I think the two words he used were models and executors. So like the model would be music, and the executor would be a record player, which evolved into a cassette, which evolved into a Walkman, a Discman, MP3 players, and now a phone. So the cassettes died, but music never left. And so it's kind of like that, right? So the concept of what SEO at its core will never go away. There's always a need to, especially on newer products, to how do you educate an audience that doesn't know a thing exists? And then that's a limitation of AI, because it only knows what it has access to tap into. And so if this thing doesn't exist, it can't tap into it. So it can't create the fulfillment, the marketing fulfillment for it as easily. So I think it's just an amplifier.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And, I've been playing around with some AI tools for the last couple of months, and I've found like it's such a great starting point and is really helpful for getting me brainstorming and bouncing ideas off of, like, feeling like I'm kind of talking to somebody else with ideas and, doing research and help. But I mean, who knows if it'll one day get to that point, but I agree that, like, if you have any kind of quality control on your content, that you're probably not able to just give it a prompt, copy paste it, and move on with your day and be like, well, that was done in 30 seconds. But it can save you a lot of time from doing all of it by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's as good or as bad as the input you provided. So, the better you get at understanding, using it and prompts in particular, then the better the output will be. So it's really, the potential is really based on the user.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you feel like tools like ChatGPT or some of the more content specific ones like Jasper, Copy AI, or any of those, like, where do you think they might miss the mark when it comes to SEO?
The first thing that comes to mind is the conversation I've had with our copywriters. So, I got nearly 24 in-house copywriters. And as we talk about this, understandably, one of their concerns is like, hey, am I going to lose my job or lose hours? And the safety net that they have, and from my perspective, is you can't replace the human storytelling capabilities. It'll probably get close. It'll obviously improve over time, but the ability for somebody, a human, to birth an idea from nothing is substantially different than something requiring input, right? And the other thing is the relatability. AI will get better at personalities and things like that, but for the most part, even the best written AI, there's just something that feels off, right? You can just kind of tell, even if you're not sure, you at least question it. So I think the safety net is storytelling.
What about in terms of like the technical aspects of SEO, like keyword research and, making sure you are including the right keywords within your posts and things like that?
Well, so the research versus post fulfillment, I would split off, because in the post fulfillment, it depends on your process. So that's kind of like a similar answer where it depends on the user.
Right.
So a lot of people can use AI to say, create a post with, these variables, this length, this density, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I've always taken the opposite approach, where I tell my team, don't focus on word count, don't focus on keyword density. Instead, focus first on relatability and solving a problem. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where the value is, and that's where the on-page sticking time is like if people want to continue reading it. So sure, you could create 10-to-1 articles versus manually, but do they have that X factor of people wanting to read and continue?
Mm-hmm.
So if that's your thing, then yes, you can use that to do that at scale. For me, it's not my thing. But on the research side is where we've shifted gears and are adopting it more. We're actually adopting it more on the research than we are on the copywriting side. And this goes back to what we were talking about, where your abilities to leverage AI are going to be as good or as bad as your familiarity and your ability to feed it the right prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's different tools out there, like Agent GPT is one. And then there's another one that I was just exposed to. I think it was called God Mode. And so there's all these different ones that are beyond just input output text.
Did you say God mode?
I think it's godmode.space, if I remember right. Yeah. So all of these can tap into OpenAI's API, but
Mm-hmm.
what they do is different. And so they leverage that and do other things on top of that. And so, for example, instead of just input output with copywriting, a lot of these have their own API. And because they're learning models, you can tell you can tell it to connect its own API to somebody else's API, and it can it can code itself to do other things. And so what we're building out is, how can we use these apps to do the things that we already do that are very specific. So like, for example, like if we're doing competitive analysis and keyword research, we have very clear hyper granular steps where it's like, go to this tool and input this with a seed word to extract it to get multiple other words to consider, then take those other words, run them through these quality filter through this tool, this tool, this tool. And so it's very step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but it's across like 5 different tools,
Mm-hmm.
because we want the broadest picture available to
Mm-hmm.
look at things as a whole. And so where these other AI tools have APIs, then as long as you basically feed it the super prompt to do so, and you get really granular where it's like, do step 1 by connecting an API to this tool. Here's our API token. And like, if you feed it all the literal things, it's going to suck to build out, but the amount of time you will save is astronomical. So
Right.
that's our main focus, is pulling data. And so we can take what normally takes us 2 to 5 days, because we go super deep. Like if you think about SEO, you want to really make sure you got the right path locked in, because
Yeah.
6 months later, you don't want to go, crap, we made the wrong decision here. And then you have to throw away 6 months. So we
Yeah.
spend a ton of time on the front end going, where's the money for the client? Is this the right path? And so we're using that to expedite, 2 to 5 days worth of competitive analysis and keyword research down to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then taking that and going, okay, well, we have similar steps. Once we get the keywords approved from the client, then we have another granular process of how we ideate the topics that we write to support those targets. So then we can take that and go, okay, can we expedite the ideation? And then part of what we do is, like, I was really surprised with my team when we were talking about this. They said a huge amount of their time they spend is after we create the content calendar. What we do is the research team's goal is to create the best, most detailed blueprint to then just pass to the copywriters, so the copywriters can minimize their homework time and focus on writing quality content. And
Mm-hmm.
so then they get this blueprint that says, here's everything available that you can write about this, and here's the intent you want to focus on. Now, what I didn't know is, in that output that they give to the copywriters, is we do like a 1 to 3 paragraph summary of the intent of the topic that they should write about. And I knew we were doing that. I didn't know that that was like 30% of the time, just like these 2 or 3 paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I walked through how we could use some of these AI tools, it was visible how surprised and excited they were that they could eliminate this like nuanced, annoying, pound your head against the wall, but you have to do it anyway, repetitive thing, and still maintain that quality control. So we're going heavy on the research side.
Yeah, that's cool. So for somebody who doesn't have all of the tools and APIs and resources and everything that you have, like if I just want to go to, Chat GPT and type in like, help me do keyword research for this post or something, like how would you recommend kind of Jane Doe using an AI tool for SEO research?
Feed it resources. So anything that's public data, you can feed it. So any public facing URLs, you can feed it. So you have to give it the intent. So even though you don't have APIs to maybe sets of data, you do have Google to go find examples of the ideal output. So go to Google, find an example of what you're looking for, and then in your prompts, it becomes do keyword research for, put in your client's URL, and include at least these keywords, whatever ones you know so far, and compare the targets that these 5 competitors go after. And then the AI can go through there and you can go further, right? So that's just a really basic example. But now you've told it what the intent is, what your end goal is, and then it can better fill in the blanks. And then you can go further. And again, it's as good or as bad as how you feed it the prompts. So you can get more granular and say, as you scan those 5 sites, also return the title tags of, the first 5 links on the website, return the whatever you're looking for. So it's up to you to define the variables of what you're looking for. If you can get really clear in what you're feeding it, it will give you exactly what you need. But if you're off, then, you can't be lazy with this.
Yeah.
You have to be very clear. And the better you are at your intent that you feed it, the better results you'll get.
Yeah. And everything you just said, I think just kind of proves the point that if you don't even understand what a title tag is, then you're not going to know what you need to feed the AI in order to get what you need. So really having an understanding of how SEO works is crucial.
Yeah. Well, good point to circle back to that. When I was testing one of them, I just threw in like a random prompt to see what it would give on, and it was actually on this topic. I said, give me a blueprint for an SEO campaign for personal injury attorney, something like that. And it actually returned, here's the top currently ranking websites, and here's their title tags, here's their H1s, here's their blah, 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 blah. So even if it can feed you those things, if you don't know what those things are, you still can't use them. So you either need to know what they are to feed it to get the results, or you need to know what they are in case it gives it to you and you otherwise wouldn't know what they are.
So if it came back and it said, okay, their title tag was, I don't know, give me an example of what the title tag would be for a post on personal injury attorney.
Personal injury, top 5 reasons you need a personal injury attorney in Las Vegas.
Okay. And then that tells you what do you do with that information then?
So you look for patterns, right? So a really simplistic way is to reverse engineer what you see. Because if you look at the top results in a search engine, it's more or less implied that patterns contribute to why those are ranking. So like a good example is there's an acronym called TF-IDF. It stands for term frequency, inverse document frequency. Now, it's not an official part of any algorithm, but if you look at data, it could be implied that it probably is informally part of algorithms. And what it means is the term frequency means basically content length, keyword density, things like that. Then inverse document frequency is look at who's ranking and then reverse engineer those content characteristics. And so you can look at, so you go type in, let's say you got, my personal injury attorney, Vegas.com, and then that's your client or that's you. And then you go to, you type in a you use a TF-IDF reporting tool. And then you say, compare my website, here's the domain, and I want to rank for the words personal injury attorney Las Vegas. Well, then what it does is it goes and says, cool, Damon, here's the 10 websites that currently rank for those words. And you told me your domain. So now I'm going to reverse engineer the gaps between your website and what I see as the top 10 on page 1. And it'll break it down and say, out of all the title tags, if your goal is to rank for personal injury attorney Vegas, 9 out of 10 of them have this exact match phrase and yours doesn't. 6 out of 10 of them have more than 1,622 words on the page that ranks. And it actually tells you the page that ranks, not the top level domain. It could be a sub page. And so it gives you the very specific results and reverse engineers the patterns in it. So as long as you understand what the variables are, then you can look for the patterns in those variables, and it's informally implied that those are contributing factors to how to show up higher on search engines.
Okay, fascinating. That's really interesting. I mean, I know there's a lot of SEO tools out there, of course, that claim to do kind of this same thing, like that you don't have to know how to do all of the prompts. And I'm not even saying AI specifically, but just general SEO tools, right? That you could type in Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever, and Ubersuggest, that's one of ours that we use a lot. It's like you could type those. They claim to be able to tell you the same kind of information. So you don't have to understand all of the AI and the prompts and everything. You could use a potential tool like that instead, or of course, hire it out to somebody like you and they could do it for you.
Yeah. Now I'll play devil's advocate though. We very rarely use TF-IDF. We do in very specific instances, but as a whole, we don't. And I can tell you why. And then here's the thing you have to keep in mind when you use these other tools that tell you what to write. Earlier, we talked about the importance of storytelling and solving problems. So depending on what the topic is that you're writing about, if you can solve that problem in 800 words, but TF-IDF tells you to write 2,000 words, well, now you write 1,200 words of fluff. And so then it devalues the readability, and that which negatively impacts the on-page staying time. And so there's all these other things, like it's a give and a take. I'm not saying do or don't use TF-IDF or these tools, but you have to be aware of their pros and cons.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So do you have any tools that you suggest for content creation, SEO, especially for more SEO layman's?
The first thing that comes to mind is we talked about your trajectory. Make sure you pick the right trajectory first. So not so much on specific topics, but a tool that I found out about a couple months ago that I was surprised I hadn't heard of is a lot of people will be familiar with Answer the Public, but there's another one that's like that I actually like better, and it's called alsoasked.com.
Oh, cool.
And what it does is basically the same thing as Answer the Public, but it drills down deeper. So if you're not familiar with Answer the Public, you go in there and you type a word that maybe you want to rank for, and it goes, cool, here's the queries that people are asking about that. And so that way you can get in front of the existing search and buyer demand without guessing. But it's very one layered in the results. But if you go to also asked, it'll do the same thing, but then out of all the results it returns, you can click on one and it'll drill deeper. And then you can click on one and it'll drill deeper. So you can find multiple paths. It's not a singular layer.
Yeah.
You go down rabbit holes and get more granular and go down tangents and paths. So it helps you come up with, it helps you find more potential topics from a quantity perspective, but also theoretically would improve your quality because you go deeper on the intent and relatability of the topic.
So one of the questions I always have when I use tools like Answer the Public, I haven't heard of Also Ask, so I'm going to have to check that out. Thank you. Is that the search volume for those more granular questions is usually quite low. Does that matter? Like, is the goal? So if I'm writing a post about hypnotherapy and I go to answerthepublic.com or alsoask.com, type in hypnotherapy, and there's, a bunch of questions that come up. Like, am I supposed to take those questions and use them as like, headings inside of my post and then answer the related questions in there? Like, what do I do with that information?
So quality matters more. A really simple way to look at this is, would you rather have 7 people buy out of 10 visits or 1 person buy out of 1,000?
Hmm.
And so of course it's 7 out of 10. And
Yeah.
so when you look at search volume is not my primary indicator of what to target. It's probably like third.
Okay.
What is first is buyer intent. Does that target imply a more qualified buyer? So earlier we talked about why I don't SEO for the phrase SEO, because
Mm-hmm.
there's no pre-qualification of that term. And so I don't want 10,000 visitors to my website. None of them are pre-qualified. Half of them are agencies. Other ones are people that don't have a budget, whatever it may be. And so I always look at the implied intent of the phrase or sentence or query way more than the search volume.
Okay. So if I'm a coach who sells hypnotherapy sessions, what is an example? This may not be, obviously, like, we're not doing the research live here on the call, but what would you think? Like, how does buyer intent come into, like, okay, I sell hypnotherapy sessions.
Mhm.
Um, I want to write some posts so I can get quality people to my site and then get them to buy a session. What would be your first step?
So figure out either what type of client you like to focus on more,
Mm-hmm.
or which type of client has a higher profit margin. And so, I'm know little to nothing about hypnotherapy other than the classes I went to with my wife for our third child. Um, the, I imagine, and forgive my ignorance, for all the hypnotherapy experts out there, but I imagine there's, hypnotherapy for depression, hypnotherapy for um, confidence, hypnotherapy for quitting smoking, hypnotherapy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do in hypnotherapy? So for me, I don't target SEO. So if I were to target it, it would be something more specific, like I would probably actually go for the lower volume ones, like most expensive enterprise SEO agency. Not that
Mm-hmm.
we are the most expensive, but that implies a better buyer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you could, if you just go after broad hypnotherapy and you focus on, the hypnotherapist we went to was for like childbirthing. And
Right.
so it's like they want nothing to do with helping somebody quit smoking. And so you got to figure out or clarify what your niche or specialty or interest or profit potential is
Mm-hmm.
beyond just the broad terms.
The broad term. That makes sense. So I think that for qualifier makes a lot of sense then. So it would be hypnotherapy for childbirth, hypnotherapy for quitting smoking. And depending on what kind of coach or therapist you are, you would target those specific ones that apply to what you sell.
For sure. Yeah. And then tying that back to the volume, hypnotherapy probably has tens, if not hundreds of thousands of searches per month. But if you do um, hypnotherapy for childbirthing, it probably has hundreds to thousands,
Mm-hmm.
like 10% or less of the other one. But then if you go further and you go hypnotherapy for childbirthing, um, for, a woman that has had a specific type of birth complication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then when you're the lead, which is 1 in 1,000, when you see that, you don't hesitate to buy because you're like, that person knows exactly what I need.
Right.
So
Right.
you focus on the intent of the people you can serve best.
And then in the post itself, just to continue using this example, are you right? So if the post is like, hypnotherapy for childbirth, um, for a VBAC. So somebody who's had C-sections before and now wants to have a vaginal delivery. And so they want to use hypnotherapy to help them do this. Then in the post itself, are you using the post to like now buy my course, buy my coach,
Hmm.
how do you incorporate the buy piece into the content?
So we'll blend that answer with the topic earlier about social media, where you give away the advice, you give away
Mm-hmm.
the answers. So if and when it's appropriate to transition to a call to action, it's after you've over delivered on value. So
Right.
it's nowhere in the top, it's nowhere in the middle, it's always in the bottom. Like, establish the trust first.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because what we talked about, they're going to buy based on the trust and implementation, not so much the knowledge, but the knowledge is where you communicate that you are the person that they can trust.
Okay. So you figure out, okay, the search intent of somebody who's typing that in is that they want to figure out how to use this tool to have a successful feedback. So the post is going to tell them how hypnotherapy can do that for them, why, it's a good option. And if they want to have one-on-one support to implement this, then they could take the next step with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay, cool. So let's see, we are coming up on the end here. I have a few extra questions, but just so we don't run out of time, what is something that you feel like coaches, course creators, consultants, kind of practitioners in this online space, what didn't I ask you about SEO that they need to know?
Nothing so much comes to mind with SEO, but I would say that there's a trend of like keeping up with the Joneses, or like just doing stuff that other people do,
Mm-hmm.
whether you know it's effective or not. One of the most powerful things I've done is stop caring what other SEOs do.
Mm,
So years ago, I stopped reading industry blogs. I stopped going to SEO conventions, and coaching is probably the same, if not more impacted by this, where people just regurgitate other
yeah.
people's stuff. And so, like, one person says this one tiny thing, and then somebody else spins it on theirs, and it becomes a bigger thing, and then somebody else regurgitates it and spins it on there, and then it just gets completely diluted and inaccurate. But everybody's saying it, so you think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of power and freedom in not feeling obligated to do things the way that everybody else does.
Yeah, I love that. That's definitely something we work with our clients on, is like putting on your blinders and forgetting what everybody else is doing, even if it comes to something like pricing. And then people say, well, I don't know any other parenting courses that sell for over $300, so I can't price my course over $300. And it's
Total
like,
opposite.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And if you do, you are going to stand out, and there's going to be, I mean, you have obviously have to be able to deliver on the value,
Hmm.
but yes, total opposite experience. So if you have your blinders on, how do you stay up to date on trends and things that are happening in this industry and best practices?
By our own trial and error and implementation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to know what works because I've seen it work, not because I read it on a blog. And I also want to find things that work because we experimented on our own and not waited for other people to figure it out. So the most impactful strategies that we've implemented are all things that I've read little to none about or heard other people talk about. Now, the variable that we use is talked about, but the way in which we implement it, I don't see other people do. And so
Yeah.
that goes to support the same thing for coaches, is like, look, I don't have any proprietary thing above other SEOs. I just use those same tools better.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same thing with coaching. Like, you probably don't have a patent or a trademark on something that nobody else can literally physically use.
Mm-hmm.
You're generally all using the same uh, resources and tools, but if you figure out how to be the best at using it in your own way, you're going to stand out and be more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Okay, as we finish up here, what advice do you have? A lot of our listeners are people who want to implement more SEO, but just don't even know where to start. If they've never done anything on their site through an SEO lens, and they just either are just starting their site, or maybe they've even been established, in their business for a while, but they've never factored in any kind of SEO um, into it, then what would you recommend like their first step be? Like, what's the first most powerful action they could take to improve their rankings?
So long term, well, expectations is actually the most important thing, is understanding that SEO is not a quick thing, because you are building up the credibility of your website.
Right.
And the logistics behind doing that means um, content creation. And, I'm going to kind of skip all the technical stuff for now, but, there's a lot of moving parts and it takes time to do those things. So that's the first thing, is having realistic expectations. Now, the second thing of actual fulfillment is focus on what you're an expert at. Like, why are you different? Why do you stand out? What skill set do you have and experience is different than the others? And then showcase that knowledge. So a really simple way to understand SEO is you can only show up on Google for what it can read. So if you're not contributing, it's not going to find anything to read to rank you uniquely. Now, if you don't like to write, which is understandable, then get on your phone and do a selfie video. You don't have to publish it, but what you can do is just ramble, like get that expertise out of your brain. And then you can take that and drop it through a transcription service, something like Descript.
Yeah.
And then you drop that in there. And then within 30 seconds, it's taken that 5-10 minute video and put it into Word format that search engines can now read. You'll need to take a minute or two to, spell check it and things like that. But consistency is key. Like when you think about, social media, people talk about how YouTube will reward you for consistency. Podcasting will reward you for consistency. Facebook will reward you for consistency. It's the same thing in publishing on your blog. So figure out an approach in which you can consistently create content, and then figure out how to transition that into a readable format. So sharing your knowledge is the easiest go-to with the least resistance.
Yeah. And do you feel like there is any kind of magic number for the frequency that you'll get the best results if you post something new once a week, once a day, once a month?
I would say no more or no less than twice per month. So every other week, I would say, is kind of a minimum. Now, there's no such thing as too much good content if it's unique and value added. So if you can do more, then do weekly. If you're super gangster and can do more than that, then do multiple times a week. But don't do it at the expense of quality.
Right. Got it. Thanks so much for being here, Damon. This was really interesting. I hope everybody learned a lot. Can you tell everyone who's listening where they can find you and how they might be able to work with you?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kate. Kind of on the last topic you mentioned is learning more about SEO. I wrote a book a couple years ago and I give away for free. You can go to freeseobook.com. There's no upsell on the thank you page. It just invites you to an upcoming Facebook group. And it's the whole book. It's a book. It's like 130 pages. So it's our entire processes. And if you put in the time, the answers are there.
Awesome. Thanks, Damon. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Kate.